Your fundamental identity changes overnight. You go from thinking of yourself as primarily an individual to suddenly being a mother first and foremost.
Princess Catherine has just uncovered a plan to change the will of King Charles. To make matters worse, Queen Camilla orchestrated the plan right in the middle of King Charles's health crisis. Hidden meetings, late-night visits with lawyers, and concealed folders at Buckingham Palace. When Catherine finally discovered what was happening, she was left speechless. Could the Queen have really changed the King's will while? And if true, what does it mean for William and young George's future? Join us as we break down the most dramatic scandal in modern royal history, Princess Catherine's shocking discovery. Catherine is no longer a stranger in Buckingham Palace. She had grown used to the endless routines of palace life, the daily sound of footsteps along marble corridors, the clatter of cups during afternoon tea, and the rustle of papers carried by private secretaries. Yet in recent weeks, something inside the palace had changed. It was not loud or obvious, but it was there. She felt it every time she entered a room. Conversations dropped away too quickly. Staff members, who once greeted her warmly, now exchanged glances when she passed. They spoke in lower voices. At first, she dismissed it as her own imagination, the natural stress that came with the king's fragile condition. Although the palace did not release any official statement, media rumors suggest that Charles's health had been declining in recent weeks. His movements were slower, his once commanding voice now soft, sometimes strained. He often retreated into long hours of rest, guarded fiercely by those closest to him. However, while Catherine thought the king's health was all there was to worry about, what came next shocked everyone. Catherine knew illness brought unease to any royal household, but something else was happening under the surface, something that made even seasoned staff tread carefully. Camilla's presence only made it worse. The Queen had always walked with calm authority, but there was a new urgency in her steps, a deliberate control over her schedule that did not invite questions. Late at night, when most of the palace had gone quiet, Catherine noticed a peculiar pattern. Camilla slipped from her chambers and moved toward the king's private study. She never went alone. A handful of lawyers followed her, their briefcases clutched tightly. These were not casual visits. They were formal, secretive, and they repeated often enough to be noticed by anyone paying attention. Catherine was paying very close attention. On one of those evenings, she lingered in a dim corridor, far enough to avoid being seen, but close enough to watch the Queen's movements. Camilla disappeared into the study, closing the heavy door behind her. No royal aides accompanied her. No senior courtiers stood by, as tradition required for any official business with the monarch. Only the lawyers were allowed in. Catherine's pulse increased as she waited in the shadows. Hours passed before the door opened again. Camilla came out first, carrying a folder pressed tightly against her chest, her expression composed but unreadable. The lawyers followed, leaving the palace in silence. The absence of royal aides was the detail she could not shake. Every important matter involving the king was supposed to pass through the proper channels. Senior advisors were always present to witness, record, and ensure that no step was taken outside the rules. Yet here was Camilla, conducting private meetings with lawyers deep into the night, meetings that left no trace for others to verify. Catherine did not need anyone to tell her that this was unusual. She had lived in the palace long enough to understand that when customs were ignored, something was wrong. Keep watching, because things are about to get a lot more interesting. Meanwhile, King Charles grew weaker. He spent more time in his bedchamber, sometimes unaware of who had entered the room, drifting in and out of drowsy silence. When he was awake, his thoughts appeared foggy, and his words incomplete. Palace sources mentioned that Catherine visited him as often as she could, always keeping her voice calm, always trying to cheer him with her presence. Yet each visit increased her worry. He was too frail to keep track of what was happening around him, too dependent on those who controlled his schedule. It was clear that if important matters were being decided in his name, he could not truly oversee them. That realization gnawed at Catherine more than anything else. For Catherine, the worry was not only about Charles's well-being. She also thought about her children's future, especially George's. The monarchy was more than a public duty. It was the life her family was bound to, and any quiet shift in decisions made behind closed doors could alter their path forever. She felt the walls closing in, the silent pressure of time slipping away. If something was indeed being orchestrated without the king's clear understanding, she could not sit idle. Yet moving too soon, without proof, could destroy everything she hoped to protect. It was during one of these tense days that a loyal staff member approached her discreetly. "Get ready for the explosive revelation just ahead." According to royal sources, the staff member had served the family long enough to know when silence was more dangerous than words. With caution, he warned Catherine that not everything happening in the palace was meant to be seen, and not every silence was harmless. Betrayal, he hinted, often lived in the quiet, not in the noise. His words stayed with her, echoing through the halls as she walked. They sharpened her instincts, confirming what she had already begun to sense. She was not mistaken. Something was indeed unfolding, and it was hidden in plain sight. The more Catherine observed, the clearer it became. The whispers, the sudden silence when she entered, the lawyers arriving at odd hours, the folders clutched tightly against Camilla's chest, and the frailty of the king. Everything pointed to a secret being carefully managed under Camilla's control. It was not paranoia, it was not imagination. It was a pattern, and she had caught it. Catherine did not yet know the full scope of the plan, nor how deep it ran, but she knew enough to recognize the danger. A door had been opened somewhere in the palace, a door that should never have been touched. Beyond it, decisions were being made without the king's clear consent, decisions that might touch her family in ways she could not yet measure. As she watched Camilla move through the palace with composed authority, Catherine felt the quiet resolve harden within her. The palace still runs as usual. Visitors still arrived, state papers still flowed, and ceremonies were held as though nothing had changed. But under it all, Catherine saw the cracks. She knew she was standing at the edge of something that could alter not just the days ahead, but the very future of the monarchy itself. The whispers would not stop on their own. They were building towards something larger, something she would need to face sooner than she had ever imagined. Stay with us to understand Catherine's next move. Princess Catherine found the hidden will. Princess Catherine's suspicion reached its peak one late afternoon when she crossed a quiet corridor near the king's private rooms. She had not intended to wait, but a sound caught her ear. Camilla's voice, low but firm, drifted through the half-open door of a small sitting room. Catherine paused, careful not to reveal herself. She had no desire to eavesdrop, yet the words reached her clearly enough to freeze her in place. Camilla was speaking of final revisions. The tone was deliberate, not casual. There was only one thing inside the palace that was usually spoken of in such terms when lawyers were involved: the king's will. A cold fear rippled through Catherine. Final revisions meant something was being prepared, something nearing completion. She knew Charles was in no state to oversee legal documents. His mind wandered too often, and his body was far too weak. If revisions were indeed being made, then the question was by whose hand and for whose benefit. The possibility that Camilla might be guiding such a process without oversight made Catherine feel more unease. From that moment, her eyes sharpened on every detail. She began to notice what might have slipped by her before. Camilla frequently carried folders in her arms, pressed against her chest as if guarding something precious. These were no ordinary briefing papers or schedules. On one occasion, Catherine saw her hand a sealed envelope directly to a lawyer who left the palace quickly afterwards. There were no courtiers present, no official staff logging the movement of documents, no trace of routine. It was all too deliberate and too secretive to be ignored. Catherine's suspicion grew, pushing her towards someone she trusted beyond the shifting loyalties of palace staff. Sir Alan Wexford, the palace solicitor, had served the family through countless matters of state and law. His loyalty was considered unshakable, his knowledge of royal protocols unmatched. Catherine arranged a meeting with him under the veil of normal business, ensuring that her presence would not raise questions. When she finally sat across from him, she asked about the king's will. Catherine carefully phrased her questions, so as not to reveal the depth of her concern. Sir Alan hesitated, his face betraying discomfort. After a long pause, he admitted that the will had indeed been updated privately only weeks ago. He gave no details, citing discretion, but the single word privately struck Catherine harder than anything else. Privately meant outside the usual witness structures, and privately meant away from the protection of tradition. Privately meant someone had taken advantage of the king's weakness. But that wasn't all she was worried about. The timing of the revisions matched the period when Charles had been almost constantly sedated. His strength, barely enough to sit upright for brief audiences. He could not have followed the language of legal documents in that state. He would not have been able to sign them with a clear understanding. The conclusion pressed itself on Catherine's mind with a force she could not shake. Whatever had been signed or altered was not a reflection of the king's true will. It was something else entirely. Days later, as though fate wished to confirm her suspicions, Catherine discovered an envelope slipped under the door of her sitting room. There was no name on the front, no seal, only the unmistakable sense of urgency. She hesitated before opening it, her fingers cold against the paper. Inside lay several copied pages of a document. Her eyes moved across the text with growing disbelief. The revisions were clear. Properties, estates, and collections, long considered part of the line of succession, had been redirected. Instead of passing toward William and George as tradition dictated, large sections were set aside for Camilla's children. The wording left little doubt. The king's legacy was being reshaped, shifted away from the bloodline of the monarchy toward the queen's family. The shock left Catherine momentarily breathless. She read the pages again, slower this time, but the meaning did not change. It was not only unusual, it was unprecedented. Centuries of tradition were being cut apart quietly and stitched into something else entirely. If these pages reflected the full revisions, then her children's inheritance of duty and responsibility was being shared out piece by piece. The monarchy itself was being bent in directions it was never meant to go. Her mind turned quickly to the manner in which the revisions had been made. The king was in no state to dictate these changes. His condition made it impossible for him to track details, let alone sign them with intent. That left only two explanations, neither of them comforting. Either Charles had been guided into placing his signature on documents he did not understand, or the documents had been forged to carry a weight they did not deserve. In either case, it was manipulation. In either case, it was betrayal. The manner in which she found the envelope was also suspicious. Someone inside the palace knew what was happening and wanted Catherine to see. Whoever had slipped those pages under her door had taken a risk. They trusted her enough to act, and they feared sufficient to remain hidden. That thought steeled her resolve. She was no longer doubting shadows. She now held evidence in her hands. Stay tuned, because Catherine's next action changes the whole story. Catherine folded the pages carefully and locked them away. She knew better than to rush into confrontation. Camilla was too careful, too skilled at presenting herself as steady and composed in the public eye. Any accusation made without unshakable proof would collapse under scrutiny and turn against Catherine herself. The Queen's influence over the press, over court circles, even over parts of the household was strong. One misstep, and Catherine could find herself painted as paranoid, as a woman letting fear rule her judgment. But she also knew she could not remain still. The longer she waited, the more firmly the revisions would take root, the more irreversible they would become. She had to gather proof, piece by piece, and strengthen her position until the truth could not be denied. She owed that to Charles, who lay too weak to defend his own intentions. She owed it to William, who stood next in line, and most of all she owed it to George, whose future could be stolen before he was old enough to claim it. In the quiet of her private rooms, Catherine sat for a long time that evening, her mind racing with what lay ahead. Catherine closed her eyes and steadied her breath. The time for silent observation had ended. She had crossed into something far larger, something she could not ignore. Her path was no longer about sensing unease or catching glimpses of secrecy. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how deep it was buried, and as she held the copied pages close, she understood that her next steps would carry her into a conflict she could not yet measure, one that would test not only her resolve, but the very bonds of the family she was trying to protect. Her next move will set the palace on fire, but of course, for a good reason. Let's break down how she pulled it off. Catherine's silent war. The more Catherine watched, the clearer the pattern became. Camilla was not only working in the shadows with lawyers, but also silently rebuilding the palace itself. Staff who had long been loyal to Catherine and William began to vanish quietly, their departures explained with polite phrases about retirements, new opportunities, or sudden family needs. Yet the timing was too sharp, the replacements too carefully chosen. In their place came new faces, people whose loyalty lay not with the future of the crown, but with the Queen alone. Catherine noticed the subtle shift in tone during meetings, the way instructions seemed to echo Camilla's wishes, never questioned, never challenged. What had once been a household balanced across generations was now tilting heavily toward one woman's influence. It was in this shifting ground that Catherine found her next clue. Through a contact among the palace's small technology staff, she was shown evidence that unsettled her deeply. Records of computer access revealed late-night logins to sensitive files, including the king's legal documents. The logs carried Charles's credentials, yet the timing made no sense. The king had been either asleep or too unwell even to touch a computer. The pattern of access matched the nights Catherine had seen Camilla closeted away with lawyers. The overlap was undeniable. When she pressed for more, the technician confirmed what she feared. The files had been opened, altered, and saved under the king's name, but the activity came from a device not used by him. To Catherine, the meaning was clear. Camilla had gained access to his digital authority, using his identity to move pieces that should have been beyond her reach. It was a quiet theft of power, invisible to the public eye, but devastating in its implications. The whole thing was getting too much for Catherine to carry alone. She confided in William, laying out the fragments she had gathered. He listened with care, though worry creased his face. His warning was gentle but firm. To move too quickly, without absolute proof, would trigger a scandal that could destroy them before the truth even came to light. The Queen's image was polished and untouchable in the public eye. To accuse her would be seen as reckless unless every step could be backed by evidence so strong it could not be denied. Catherine understood his caution, but the knowledge did not ease the storm rising inside her. Keep watching because the story is about to get wild. In the weeks that followed, Camilla carried herself with the same composure she always displayed in public. She smiled through ceremonies, her hands steady, her words measured, her image untarnished. The press painted her as a figure of calm authority, standing firm while the king struggled with illness. To the outside world, she appeared flawless. But Catherine, watching from within, saw the other side. She saw the calculated replacements in staff, the sealed folders moving quietly from hand to hand, the growing wall that separated her from decisions she should have been part of. Then came the message that changed everything again. A note reached her discreetly, requesting a meeting in private. It was from Dr. Houston, one of the physicians attending to Charles. Catherine met him under the cover of routine, but her heart raced with what he might reveal. In that meeting, the truth spilt out in measured words. When the revisions to the king's will were signed, Charles had been under sedation. His mind was dulled, his awareness clouded. He could not have understood the documents before him, let alone consented to them. The papers carried his signature, but they did not convey his intent. The confirmation cut through any lingering doubt. Catherine now knew with certainty that the changes had been made through manipulation. The king's weakness had been used against him. She could not bring this to light yet, not without risking collapse before she was ready, but she could no longer remain passive. Quietly, carefully, she began to gather allies. She turned to legal advisors, who still placed loyalty to the crown above personal favor. She shared only what was necessary, never the full picture, for secrecy was her shield. Piece by piece, she built a circle of trust, small but strong enough to stand with her when the moment came. Every step carried risk, but silence carried greater danger. Her persistence paid off when she finally secured what she most needed: a digital copy of the original will. It had been hidden in the palace's secure archives, untouched by the alterations that followed. When they compared the two documents, there was no room for doubt. Queen Camilla had tampered with it. The original preserved the traditions of inheritance, ensuring the monarchy's continuity through William and George. The altered version stripped that away, redistributing power and property toward Camilla's children. The changes were not minor. It was a rewriting of the future itself. Catherine stared at both documents. The truth laid bare before her. She now held the proof she needed, yet she also knew she could not act rashly. Timing was everything. To move too soon would allow the Queen to bury the evidence under her influence. To wait too long means the manipulated will might become accepted as fact. But that wasn't all. Queen Camilla consolidated her hold over the palace. Catherine and William found themselves gradually edged away from the heart of royal duties, no longer the familiar faces leading key events. In their place, Camilla stepped forward, the press seizing every chance to frame her as the steady rock holding the monarchy together. Headlines praised her composure, her calm presence beside the fading king, and the public, shielded from the truth, accepted the image without question. Inside the palace, tension brewed. Catherine and William disagreed on how far to push back. William believed caution was the safest shield, fearing that exposing Camilla's actions without proof could shatter not just their reputations, but the monarchy itself. Catherine, however, felt time slipping away. Every delay risked the security of her children's future, particularly George's place as heir. For her, hesitation felt like surrender. The quiet strain between husband and wife became as heavy as the palace walls themselves. Then came a shock no one expected. After days of uncertainty, King Charles stirred back to life. His recovery was fragile, but his first clear request was startling in its clarity. He asked to see Catherine alone. Catherine did not waste time. She told him about the will, about the changes that had redirected vast estates and priceless collections to Camilla's children, about the secrecy that had wrapped the palace in silence. Charles listened in confusion and horror. He admitted he had no memory of ever signing such revisions. He recalled weakness, sedation, and days that blurred together, but nothing that could explain the legal documents now tied to his name. Realization cut through him like a cold wind. This is nothing short of betrayal. His trust had been used against him, his frailty exploited at the darkest moment. For Catherine, it was the first spark of light in a long and suffocating battle. With the king now aware, Queen Camilla's fake plan has failed. Thank you for staying with us. Could Catherine have handled the will matter better? Share your opinions with us in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the following video on your screen, and you will enjoy it.